Welcome back to Eye on Foxborough. I'm Karen Guregian, and today I am happy to have a good friend, Paul Perillo of Patriots.com. Uh, Together, we've seen, I think, 5 workouts, 2 of them padded. Paul does blogservations on Patriots.com. Gee, Paul, we don't have much to talk about, do we?
No, especially if we're gonna talk about Monday. I don't think anything really
Yeah,
happened
nothing,
Monday.
nothing to see here, Paul.
Yeah, it was a tough day. I mean, even like coming in on Tuesday morning, and just talking to some of the guys, and they were like, wow, what just happened? You start off, Sunday night into Monday morning, you're finding out about a Christian Barmore situation and how serious that could be, and you don't want to necessarily focus on football when it's a real life,
Yeah.
kind of a situation like blood clots, but man, what are they going to do about football losing a guy like that if potentially he can't play? And then it just spirals out of control with the whole Matthew Judon situation that we went through. And again, back to football, Drake May not necessarily looking great once the pads were on. So yeah, we had a lot of stuff going on Monday, and not a lot of it was good.
It's like, so we sit on a hill pretty much, watching out on 2 fields. And it's almost like we had our binoculars. We're watching one way to see Drake May. We're watching another way to see Matthew Judon and going back and forth and back.
Yeah.
I mean, it was slightly, oh, we're also seeing who's taken Barmore's place. And oh, Rosenhaus is there and he's talking, he's Godchow's agent. It was nuts. So,
A tough day.
yeah. So, obviously Barmore's health is the first priority, but I really don't think, I know, Jerod Mayo said the same thing, but it's almost like that's such a blow. You can't replace him, I don't think.
Yeah, well, they certainly don't have anybody with that kind of skill set on the roster, to replace him. They have guys that probably are better pure run stuffers than he is, and they might have some guys potentially that could get after the passer maybe a little better. But I don't think they have the combination of a disruptive force inside with the kind of size that he has and the
Right.
kind of athleticism to disrupt the pocket. People forget, like that pass rush went away last year when Judon was out for all that time. But Barmore was consistently a problem for
Push in the
quarterbacks,
pocket. Yeah, for
pushing
sure.
the pocket. They don't have that kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think Keon White is kind of emerged, but he's not in the middle of the pocket type of guy, I don't think.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. They're giving him some opportunities to do different things. We've seen him sort of standing up. We've seen him down, more of a Dietrich Wise kind of end on the outside. But I wonder, KG, if he could be one of those kinds of guys. He's got a lot of size, and I'm not sure he's as athletically gifted, like say a Judon. He's not going to be an edge rusher like that. But I wonder if maybe he can be a hybrid of the two and maybe work, like a hybrid kind of role inside.
Yeah, I agree. We'll see, because I've been impressed with Keon White during this camp. They just don't have anyone with Barmore's girth and ability to just dominate, dominate people. Two
Yeah.
guys, and
And
they
it's a rare thing.
off
Like there's
and
not a lot of guys like that around the league, and you obviously you talk about, you know, I hesitate to say it, Aaron Donald. Okay. No one's saying that Christian Barmore is at that level. Chris Jones, those kinds of guys. But there aren't a ton of guys that play the run effectively enough and as an interior guy can still rush the passer the way that Barmore can. Now, he's not at the level of those guys that I mentioned, but that's the way he plays, and he's only getting better. To lose him, I think, is a huge blow to that front seven.
yeah, I agree. Another potential blow, depending how it turns out, is Matthew Judon. I'm curious if you think, obviously last week he spoke to us. He said he was going to honor his contract. That was what it was. He wasn't happy, but it didn't seem like things would escalate to what we saw Monday, where he was having animated conversations with Jerod Mayo, with Elliot Wolf, anyone who would listen. I'm not sure if Jerod actually kicked him out. It looked that way at one point, and he came back. Has he gone too far? And where do you see this headed?
Yeah, I was a little surprised we didn't hear more about his absence yesterday on the record. My
Right.
feeling is you're right. I think Jerod Mayo said, you know what? You need to leave and don't come tomorrow either. That's just my guess. I've asked a few people in the building. I haven't had anybody that has told me that. But my feeling is that was probably you don't want to practice today. You're not going to practice tomorrow either. And maybe with the day off on Wednesday, they can get something going and moving forward and figure out how they're going to resolve this. I wonder, Karen, if it's as simple as he talked to us last week, sort of said he'd honor the contract, express his displeasure. Obviously, he wants more
Yeah.
money. And then what's the next thing that happens over the weekend is there's another signing, another extension announced for Jabril Peppers. So maybe he looked at that and said, this is getting ridiculous. It's literally everyone but me and Godchild.
Yeah.
So maybe that was the last straw for him. That said, he didn't handle that very well. That was not professional behavior by Matthew Judon on Monday. And if in fact, and again, I'm going to stress the if part, if in fact the team told him to go away and not come back on Tuesday, I think that they had no alternative. I think that was the right thing to do.
How big a test is this for the new regime? How this plays out? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Do they give in? Do they trade him? Or even trading him might be like, well, you could shoot your way out of town. I mean,
It's tough. You're right.
they're in a pickle, I almost think,
So I kind of felt like heading through the offseason that the way this would get resolved is the Patriots would give him a little more money. I don't know, another 8 or 10 million, to get it closer to 15 million, with the idea of, we'll get a half a season out of him and trade him at the trade deadline. Because I do think there's some value there. I think you could maybe get a a day two pick for him, maybe a third rounder, maybe a fourth rounder. Who knows? I don't know if this is going to damage his marketability. This tirade that could have an adverse effect on his value. But that's kind of where I thought it was going, and now I'm not really sure exactly where it's going to land. But at 32. I think it's reasonable if Elliot Wolf looks at him and says, Matthew, you've done a good job for us the last couple of years, but you are probably not going to be around and be part of our next really good team. So we're not going to extend you. Now, they have the money to do it. I would give them a little bit more money to satisfy them in the short term, and then I would move on.
Yeah. Well, I talked to or communicated with an NFL executive who basically, if they traded him like this week, they wouldn't get much in return. Because again, nobody's desperate right now. But obviously I mean, he had it like at a 5th round pick, which was stunning to me. But, if a team loses their top rusher or, then the price will go up for them. So I almost think
that's what I would do. I'd wait it out.
Yeah, I would try and appease him for the time being. And then again, the Patriots aren't getting to the playoffs this year. This is a rebuilding year. Before the trade deadline, someone who's an edge rusher away, that's when that's where they're going to make the most. So,
and to your point about it being sort of a test of the Mayo Wolf regime, I agree. And I think that's a way that they could make it look, they stood tall, they stood firm with him. They gave him a little more money to satisfy him in the short term, but they didn't forget. And then I think he's a perfect candidate. Like, I want him on the team at the start of the year to help the defense and sort of be a veteran presence in the front seven. But at the same time, we're not going to just roll over and give him this big extension. We're going to move him before the trade deadline. To your point, someone might lose a pass rusher once the season starts, and maybe you can get, instead of a 5th rounder, you make it a 4th or a 3rd rounder, and there's a little bit of a win for both sides.
Basically, they need to beef up their asset now. I don't think, I mean, somebody, Devon Godchild was somebody else who's unhappy with his contract. Somebody reported that he didn't participate or isn't participating in drills, which is absolutely wrong.
Yep. I'm so glad you said that.
I mean, I don't know what people are seeing, but he's been there. He's been there. He's been participating. He did voice his displeasure, but he also has his agent doing his business for him, as opposed to, making a public scene
Yep.
during the workout.
Yeah.
So
And again, we'll go back to that Black Monday practice.
that,
You know, they had three different series of 11 on 11s, and he was in the very first play, like in pads, first play of 11 on 11. He was at nose tackle. So I don't really understand how anybody could report that he is standing on the side, not doing. Now, does he look enthusiastic about what he's doing? No. He's probably doing the bare minimum, but he is out there. He was in pads and he did participate.
yeah, I saw him doing the one-on-ones against the tackles, So I'm going, maybe somebody's confusing his number, but as you said, he might not be the most enthusiastic guy out there, but he is participating and not going through the motions necessarily.
So with him, you wonder, does the Barmore situation give him a little leverage? Maybe does that, increase the urgency for them to deal with Godchaux's? And again, Drew Rosenhaus was here in that practice. Like you said, instead of Godchaux having to do things to sort of show everybody, his agent is doing the talking.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. Let's go to the other side of the ball, offensively, quarterback. And of course, everyone wants to know about Drake Maye. And, he struggled. Let's face it, he's struggling. But I don't necessarily think it's time to jump off ship with Drake Maye. I just think he's learning. And Jacoby Brissett looks just fine for what he is. And that's just how it's going to be until, the light goes on and Drake Maye figures things out. Agree or disagree on that?
I think that's perfectly put. All of it, from Maye to Brissett. I think that we've seen some like flashes of the ability that we were sold on Maye. I mean, there's no question. The size, the athleticism, the mobility, the arm, we've seen it, but he is absolutely struggling. He has not played. I don't think he's really looked all that good in any of the practices, but certainly the two with pads on were not good. With Brissett, he looks like he's a guy who's been in the league for 8 or 9 years, whatever it is, and has an understanding of the offense. Is it flashy? No. Is he going to go out and win games? No. But he's probably not going to be the sole reason that you lose a lot of games, because he's probably going to be mistake-free-ish and get you in and out of the right plays. So it might be not a bad bridge quarterback to start the season with. But yeah, I would agree with your assessment in its entirety with Maye. I mean, he's a work in progress.
Yeah. And I actually think Brissett's level of quarterback play will be above the level of quarterback play we saw last year from whoever was under center.
Yeah, I would say in terms of the mistakes, yes. Like, I don't think he'll throw as many interceptions as Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi did. But I also don't know if he'll make many plays. So in one regard, you might say, well, that's good, because if they just had an offense that didn't make, life so difficult on the defense, they might have been able to win a couple of more games. And that might be true. I just feel like you're going to need to be able to get up to 24, 27 points consistently in this league to win. And I don't see Jacoby Brissett being able to do that. The schedule is a little bit more difficult than it was last year, provided that, the same things that happened last year, like Aaron Rodgers going down, the first game and giving you two backup quarterbacks to play against the Jets. To me, on paper, it looks more difficult.
Mm-hmm. Were you someone prior to watching the workouts who thought that Drake Maye, being the number 3 overall pick, had to start week 1?
No, I don't have any problem with get rookies starting right away, but they need to be ready. And I felt like, based on what I had heard and read, and people, from some people that I really respected about, he's 21, he's got a long way to go, he's got a lot of development to do. I wasn't really expecting him to be ready to go week one. Now, I kind of hoped it happened from a selfish standpoint. You know, we work for the team, so obviously you're looking for positive angles, and you can sell hope to a fan base with a struggling team. It's hard to sell a journeyman backup who's never had a winning record to a fan base heading into a season. So selfishly, I was hoping we saw, Drake May making plays all over the field and lighting things up. We haven't seen that. So I didn't think it was very realistic. And based on what we've seen so far, I would say it's almost no chance at this point.
There's been some buzz around 6th-round pick Joe Milton, quarterback, and I'm not sure if it's because of his backflips or his awesome arm strength. I also saw somewhere that somebody thought he was performing better than Drake May, and again, I had to shake my head at that one. How do you
It's the
see
same
that?
someone that doesn't see Devon Godchar in practice. It's interesting that we're talking about that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think Joe Milton, I think, is completely as advertised. He has immense physical ability. There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, in what he does. I think he's taken a lot of sacks. Some of these completions that we're seeing and talking about, people are ignoring that the play probably would never have happened. Like that 60-plus yard pass to Javon Baker over the weekend, after he literally ran around 4 or 5 guys that would have sacked him. But man, like, you watch the ball come out of his hand, it's different.
It is different.
And I always say, like, arm strength, is not necessarily the ability to throw the ball a long way. I think anybody in the NFL can throw the ball 60 yards.
Yeah.
Joe Milton can throw the ball 60 yards in half the amount of time it takes for most other guys to get there. That's where his arm is special. The strength of the arm is just different. Look, I thought on Tuesday, I thought he was dealing a little bit in some of those 11 on 11, some of those seam routes that he threw one to Juju. All of a sudden you're getting some. I think he brings some swagger. He threw one of them, and as soon as it left his hand, he put his hand up in the air, like it was like Larry Bird on a 3-pointer. In the 3-point contest, the guy's got a little some flash to him. So I'm curious. Selfishly, I'm waiting for the preseason games, KG, when I'm in the Bob's Discount Furniture studio right over there, and no one's watching in the fourth quarter, and Joe Milton's going to run around making plays, and I think he's going to make it a little bit exciting for the fans.
He will, and some people will misjudge what he does against the scrubs.
Yep.
As opposed to what Drake does against the first or second teamers. So you have to keep it all in perspective.
Yeah.
But I actually like the fact that the Patriots drafted 2 quarterbacks. Again, you can never, you don't know where you're going to strike it rich. You don't know who is going to develop to be that guy. And given what's in Milton's toolbox, he could develop into, someone good enough. And assuming Drake May hits his level, Joe Milton could be an asset to trade as well. So I like the fact that they went after 2 quarterbacks in the draft.
I like the idea of quarterbacks being commodities. That's the old Green Bay way. And that, if Elliot Wolf is talking about something he learned from his dad, that's Ron Wolf did that all the time. In the Brett Favre era, it was Matt Hasselbeck, it was Mark Brunell, it was Ty Detmer. He drafted a lot of, day 3 quarterbacks with the idea of we can maybe develop something here, and then we can flip them for a higher draft pick than we spent on them. And I think that's the idea. My one trepidation is what you said about Joe Milton, though, is, if people are going to start to say, wow, this guy's playing better than Drake May, like, does that put undue pressure on your 3rd overall pick? So I'm a little worried about that, because I do think he's going to go out in the fourth quarter of a preseason game playing against a bunch of guys that will not be in the NFL 2 weeks later, and he's going to light it up. And if that happens, the noise around Drake May being possible bust is going to be starting to get loud.
Yeah. Well, they don't play their first preseason game until a week or so from today. So we'll look forward to that. I also want to talk about the receivers, and obviously, as a collective, people don't think much of the group, uh, but I do see the potential in the two rookies, Jalen Polk and Jerron Baker. I mean, they've flashed at practices.
They
You
have.
know, they still have a lot to learn. And again, it's hard to know when you put them out there against a real team with, how they're going to do. But at least they're showing you a little something, agree?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I was more impressed with Javon Baker to start camp. And I thought Polk, especially on Tuesday, I thought he showed up for me. So I do think that both of those guys have had their moments and they don't look out of place. They're getting a lot of work. Now the bad thing about not having, sort of those alphas at receiver that are going to create separation and do all the work for the offense is obvious. You don't have a guy the other team's defense has to focus on. But at the same time, not having that and sort of having a group of 5, 6, 7 guys that are all kind of fighting for jobs, they're all getting a ton of work. They're all getting a lot of reps, including the two rookies. But I would throw Juju and Jalen Reagor and Tyquan Thornton and Kayshon Boutte into that mix too, because we haven't seen Kendrick Bourne at all. And we've seen very little of Demario Douglas in competitive spots. I think Tuesday was the first 7-on-7 even that he did. So those guys, Polk and Baker especially, are getting a ton of work with Jacoby Brissett, with Drake May, with Joe Milton, with Bailey Zappi. They're just constantly rotating in. So I agree with you. I think individually, there's no one that makes me say, wow. But collectively, I'm like, they might be able to cobble together 3 or 4 guys here that can give them a decent core.
Yeah. As always, the biggest problem is, again, they don't have that legitimate number one so that you can slot everyone,
Properly.
properly. You want a top guy taking out their top guy as opposed to, say, a number 2 or 3 having to go against the number 1 corner every single week. And again, that's one of the biggest problems. They just don't slot well across. Do you see them taking 5 or 6 receivers?
I think probably 6, because I feel they're, like running back is pretty thin. So like I don't know if you would just take 4 or 5 running backs just because you always take 4 or 5 running backs. I'm not sure that there's that many that really deserve a roster spot. So I wonder if maybe you could get by with a little bit more at receiver. I also wonder how the return situation is going to be. Like, to me, anytime you're returning a punt or a kick, if Marcus Jones doesn't have the ball in his hands, you're not doing it right. So I understand Jalen Reagor returned a kickoff for a touchdown last year, and people think, well, that's why he's going to make. That wouldn't be why he made the team for me. If he deserves a spot as a receiver, and you want to put him back with Marcus Jones on these new kickoffs, that makes some sense to me too. But the guy that probably I think is going to be hard pressed to stay is Juju. I'm not sure that there's room for him. The money will come into play, I think, there, but he looks the least effective of that entire group that we've talked about.
Totally agree. He says he's 100% healthy, but he still can't separate. He still can't get open, and he's had some drops.
Yeah, bad drop on Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah, which isn't helping his case. As for Rager, he to me flashed, when they didn't have pads.
Yep.
Pads come on, where is he?
Yeah, we had a couple drops on Tuesday too. Yeah, I agree, and that's the knock on him is it's a little bit different when the pads are on. Whereas I think a kid like Polk has looked better with pads on than he did without, because I don't think he's overly explosive, but he clearly has a physicality to his game and can make some catches in traffic. Went up and high pointed a ball in the end zone on Tuesday. So, I think with Rager, the physicality maybe bothers him. With Polk, it looks like he thrives on that.
Yeah. Where do you see Tyquan Thornton fitting in?
It's a great question. It's a great question. We're all
like
asking,
Rager to me.
Yeah, we're all asking, are we going to take the cheese on him again? I think there's some ability there. I don't see the consistency. I mean, at this point, I think if you keep six, maybe he's six. And that also, what is Kendrick Bourne back for the start of the regular season, or does he have to start on PUP? Now, we're starting to see him a little bit more at practice, so that would
Yeah,
tell me he's probably getting closer, and maybe
yeah,
PUP to start the season is not really in play. If you have Bourne and Douglas 1 and 2 to start the year, and then you filter in the two rookies, then it's down to what you want to do. Is it Thornton? Is it Rager? Is it, and whatever, and go from there. But I think Thornton could be in trouble.
yeah, I agree. And, who's going to get downfield? Well, I think Baker is deceptively fast.
Yeah, he has some explosiveness to his game.
That's it, his timed 40 speed isn't great. It's just sort of average. But he has this burst and this acceleration. I've seen both in tracking balls and also after catch.
Yep.
All of a sudden, boom. So, maybe they can get that explosiveness from him, or again, the rookies who have been making plays.
Yeah, and then even like Rager, if you keep him and you feel like he gives you some special teams value, he can stretch the defense too. So some of those plays are important in Alex Van Pelt's offense too. Is that and you've seen them? They've been working a lot on those, stretch zone runs, and then they'll show it and they'll put the hard play action back with a little bootleg. That's what they're looking for, is those deep over routes, and those are the ones that I would think are made for guys like Thornton, guys like Rager. Maybe Baker can be that as well. So you're not going to keep them all. It's going to those last receiver spots, I think, to me, could change by the day, because I think they've all had moments. All of those guys have had moments in these practices, but no one's been able to consistently be the best guy every day.
Yeah, I agree. We were talking to Ramondre Stevenson, who loves the new scheme, that outside zone scheme. He's very comfortable in it. The hope would be, again, because they don't have depth, that he stays healthy,
Right.
the whole year. But I'll ask you two things. Your biggest surprise so far and biggest disappointment.
So my biggest disappointment is definitely that we haven't seen more from the quarterback. I'll just say real quick, because I know we already talked about Drake May. It's nice to watch the quarterback and not have to say, well, I'm not sure he's big enough. I'm not sure he's strong enough. I'm not sure he has a good enough arm. I'm not sure he's mobile enough. Like, all those things are off the table. We're only worried about, will Drake May develop mentally enough to be an NFL quarterback? Physically, we know he has the skills. So I'm not worried about him, but that would be my biggest disappointment, is he hasn't looked better on a more consistent basis. My biggest surprise is probably the receivers that we just talked about. Just like, I think they have a chance to be okay. And I was thinking, I know there's some rankings out there that list them as having the worst wide receiver room in football, and it doesn't look like that to me. This doesn't look like a bad receiver group. It's kind of average, but it doesn't look bad. So maybe that's my biggest surprise.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be the worst. And it's funny, they're using that for fuel and motivation with 32 out of 32. But as I say, motivation and production are two different things,
Right.
So, I mean, they were motivated last year because people didn't give them, and I don't necessarily think they proved anyone wrong last year.
Exactly. Yeah. You remember how mad they were at Mike Giardi for the,
I
for the
know.
whole
Think,
stink,
stank,
stank,
stunk.
stunk. And they got all mad at poor Mike, and they went out there and they stink, stank, stunk.
Yeah. Well, just getting back to what you said about Drake May, I think his biggest problem is there seems to be a disconnect as to what he's seeing out there. And I think there's some he's been confused,
Yeah.
And, once he gets a handle on what he's seeing, or the plays, or how the plays are supposed to go, or what he's supposed to audible to, because he's hesitant. And again, he just seems unsure about what he's seeing. Once the fog clears, then you can probably see the talent.
Yeah. I mean, that's the hope. And that's absolutely the hope. And I see the same thing that you're seeing. And that's one of the parts that I'm disappointed in is, like, camp started, even a little bit in the spring, but when camp started and you start to watch every day, you see these times where it's like a step and then all of a sudden there's a funny little pump. And then he like will just hurriedly try to throw it out to the side, or dump one over the middle. And it's kind of off the back foot,
And
hurry,
inaccurate. Oh my
right?
God.
And
Yeah.
they're not good throws. And you like to say, okay, well, he's a rookie. He did that on Monday. Well, I don't want to see that again on Wednesday, and
Yeah.
certainly not on Friday. Well, we've seen it pretty much every day.
Yeah.
So the whole cliche of you don't want to be an error repeater.
Yeah.
He seems like he's making a lot of similar mistakes from day to day. I'd like to see those get cleaned up a little bit. And that's probably where my disappointment starts. Not because I think the guy can't play, but I would hope that we would see a little bit more progress by now.
Yeah.
And I know
Yeah.
that sounds silly, like 6 days into camp, but
Right. But the biggest thing is we're seeing the same mistakes repeat.
yeah.
And that's never a good sign. So, I mean, he's just got to get a handle of it. I mean, by all accounts, he's really a hard worker. Well, some of that work has to pay off,
Yeah.
at some point.
Because I do think, his footwork and his mobility, you can see the work that they've done on some of his mechanical issues. And you can see that is paid dividends. But the mental part, you're right. Like we've seen the same kind of errors from day to day.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, I don't know if we could possibly have the same kind of week that we've had so far. But in this business, Paul, you never know.
No, no, I certainly didn't show up on Monday thinking we were going to have the team's best player, sort of in a bickering match with the coach and the general manager. So you never know.
You
You
never
never
know.
know.
Well, thank you for your time. I enjoyed chatting Pats with you. And as I said, we'll see what happens down the road and perhaps we'll have you back on.
All right, anytime, Karen. You know that. Anytime.
Thanks, Paul.